Hello and welcome to the first devlog of my game, which I'm tentatively calling MIN-0, M-I-N-O. I'll go in about what that name's about in a future update. But for this one, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me, why I'm doing this, what I'm trying to do, and what I've done in the past as far as game development goes. So first off, I'm a huge gaming fan. I've owned just about every console over the last 30 years or more, and in most cases still own them. Loads of games. Always got a massive backlog, always trying to play through stuff. I love it. The only thing I don't really do is PC gaming, and that's because of a general hatred for Windows, and I just can't afford to keep up with graphics cards these days. Now, I have made my own game before, very much indie, small game, and very niche. This channel is called Curry Kitten GameDev. This has sprung from my main channel called Curry Kitten, and that is about FPV flying, where you take an FPV quad like this and you throw it about and you do exciting things from it. And I've spent a bunch of time reviewing stuff and doing tutorials and stuff on that channel. And at some point, for some reason, I can't remember why, I decided to write my own FPV sim. I think possibly because people seem to have a hard time learning, even if I sort of stood there with them and gave them some instruction. They weren't coming from the same place. If you're a gamer, you can automatically detach your thoughts from your conscious thumbs and just know what you're doing, where people haven't come from that. They were like, if I say push right on the right stick, they were like, So trying to learn the muscle memory is why I came up for it, and it was called, and it still is in fact, Curry Kitten FPV Sim. It's still not what I call a finished sim. I started putting race courses in for people to time themselves going around courses. I haven't quite finished that yet, which I need to do. But I think we have a fairly decent sim experience. You can fly around, you can plug in a proper radio, you can do things like chase AI cars or planes. There's multiple courses, there's things to fly through. And there's even a hidden game in it called Quad Ball, which is kind of a mix, I'd say, between Super Monkey Ball and Marble Madness, where you have a ball on a course and you have to get your quad to whack into the ball to move it around towards the goal area. Now, this was, and still is, written using the Unity game engine, which I became pretty comfortable in. As I went deeper into the project and did more and more, I sort of learnt more as I went, ended up like refactoring a load of code to make it more efficient, doing changes to save memory so I could put the same code out on mobile. So right now you can go and check that out, free on GitHub. It's on Steam, it's on the Play Store and the App Store for iOS, and yeah, I'm still kind of working on that. Now, I did want to experiment with some 2D gaming, because I still think there's a lot of fun to be had in 2 dimensions. So at some point several years ago, I set myself like a day's task of remaking an Asteroids game in Unity, which worked out fine. It just worked and seemed okay, and I then transformed that into a little project to help publicise a podcast I was part of called Audio, where we just used our heads and voice samples as the asteroids, so you shoot us and we'll say something and then split up into smaller parts. In the past, I considered going to Unreal for the sim, and I even prototyped a basic like quad model using one of Unreal's levels to fly around, and it felt pretty good actually. But for this project in 2D, I always thought I was going to use Unity. And then last year, Unity had the massive fallout. Their CEO decided to change the pricing model completely and insert this runtime fee. And I think even people that didn't know much about game development would have heard of this through various news channels and stuff, because there was such an outpouring of anger from existing devs. To be fair, I don't think I'd ever be in a position where that sort of runtime charge would affect me. And since that time, the CEO left and has been replaced, and some of the things have been rolled back, but that runtime charge is still something that's going to come in. So it's not the fact that I think I'm going to get charged a fee. I, like many others, didn't like the fact that Unity just decided to change their legal agreement like that and just decide to roll stuff back into previous licenses and think that was an okay thing to do. So I instantly thought, okay, I don't want to use this anymore. Let's try something different. So the engine I landed on was Godot. The reason I came on this one instead of Unreal, for example, is because I wanted 2D, and Unreal's really, really good at 3D. It can do 2D, but it's really 3D just flattened. And Godot, although it can do 3D, it's not its strength. Its strength seems to lie in 2D, as far as I can tell from reading all the stuff about it, at least. So Godot is not something I've dabbled with in the past, so it's a case of coming back and learning stuff, which is cool. I like learning new things. I think that's interesting. And at this point I've messed about with it for a while, and I think some of the good points is, and I think the best point is how lightweight it is. There's this old running joke about in the time it takes you to open a new project in Unity, you can go to the Godot website, download it, run it and start coding, and Unity will still be figuring out some stuff. That's actually pretty true. It is very fast, it's very lightweight. You can run it on very low end systems and it will be quite happy, and that I like. There are some things I don't like about it. Chiefly is the use of something called GDScript. It's got its own integrated code editor, which is great. It uses GDScript, which is kind of like Python, but with game engine-y things. It seems so to me, at least. And my bugbear with Python and GDScript is mostly the way it indicates like a code loop or a function. Instead of using the curly braces like stuff like C, C#, Java, most other languages use, it indents the code. Which sounds okay, it just can be a problem if you're trying to move code around, or you've got a complex situation where you're indented quite a way. Trying to then reorganize that can be quite difficult, because it's the case of how far you're indented along is which piece of code you belong to. If you have like curly braces to indicate your beginning and end point, it doesn't matter where you put the code, you'll always know where you are. So I don't like that. Variables in GDScript don't have to be typed either, and what I mean by that, if we have a variable called pig, then we can set it to be 0, an integer, and then we can change it to like 1.1 as a float, and then we can change it to the string I'm a pig without affecting anything. I prefer my variables to be typed, so when I define them, this is an integer, this is a float, this is a string. That way, if you ever misuse it, it'll tell you about it. Now, fortunately, you can override this, and you can set your type if you want to. You just don't require it to. I will be doing that. The other thing that I got very used to in Unity, which is missing from Godot, is the game window. Now, in Godot, you can hit run at any time and up pops a window and your game runs in it. You can see a certain amount what's going on by using the remote tab, and that kind of gives you some feedback about what's happening. But in Unity, your game window was integrated into the editor, which meant you could pick up objects and place them around. You could change variables within your code through the editor and inspector and stuff like that. It was just much easier to debug stuff and try stuff out like that. So that's missing. It's not the end of the world though. Now, while you can actually use C# for Godot, which is what we use in Unity, it's not as supported as well, and then you don't get to use the integrated editor, which I do like. So I'll be using GDScript. GDScript is new to me, but it's a bit like Python, which I've used before. At the same time, C# was used to me when I used Unity, but I'd used Java before, and that's very similar. Pretty much as if you've used a few languages, and I had a 20-something career as a software engineer, so used plenty. It's just a case of syntax and how things are called. The logic remains the same. If you know how to logically do something, then you can figure that bit out. The real differences between game engines is how you interact with different aspects of the engine. In terms of trying to learn Godot, I found this 15-hour course on YouTube. I don't know if it was the best, but it seemed to be quite long and seemed to cover quite a lot of the areas I was interested in. The important things for me is sort of how you reference a node from another node and different ways of doing that, how to handle input, the UI, different types of physics bodies, signaling, tile maps, particles, lighting, all that sort of stuff. Now, as I had to learn all this stuff anew, and there's certain aspects of Godot that's not quite as well documented as other things. Like in Unity, Unity's got its official education system, and it's got a series of courses on different things, and they're quite good. Godot's got documentation, it's got lots of different things on YouTube, but when I was trying to find specific things, I really couldn't find them, and so ended up experimenting. So I thought, if I talk about what I'm experimenting with and how I'm messing around with nodes in certain ways, then hopefully that could be helpful to people that are coming into this and searching for the same questions as I was. And that's a major part of the reason for doing these devlogs. So what's the game idea? Well, in March 2023, I was on holiday and I took this book with me and I started writing down notes for a game. Mostly writing, little bits of drawings, that sort of thing. bits and pieces. Look, there's a ship design. The one-line pitch I'd make of this is it's a Metroidvania where the protagonist is like the little ship from Asteroids. So if you're wondering what a Metroidvania is, it's a specific sort of game genre which is quite popular and has been popular for a long time. Basically, we're taking two titles. The Metroid comes from the Nintendo game Metroid, which originally came out in 1986 in Japan, and Konami's Castlevania, which also came out in 1986, both for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but they've been going and going and going ever since. It's not important those specific titles, more of the general gist of what you actually get from them. Generally in these types of games, you're either starting off like all powerful and then something happens and all your abilities are stripped. You're chucked down in some unknown alien world, and what you've got to do is explore, regain some of your abilities, that then open up the map to get to new places, fight bosses, and at the end of it you're either escaping, killing a big boss, all the time getting your power back together. Now, Metroid's still very much going. It's had 3D iterations, Metroid Dread being the last one. Castlevania kind of stopped a little bit, most famously Symphony of the Night, but multiple games which go with this modern Castlevania type influence include Hollow Knight, which is a hard as nails platformer where the same sort of thing, you have to gain abilities to get stuff and kill the bosses, and the Ori series of games, which are a bit more platformy, but you still got that same thing about exploring, reaching areas that are then inaccessible until you have the right ability to get there and eventually kill the boss. Everyone's heard of Asteroids, surely. You might not have played the original 1979 Atari arcade cabinet, but little triangular ship, stuck, asteroids coming at you, you have to fire at them to get rid of them. What I'm interested there is the control aspect. It's simple, rotate left and right, fire and thrust. I mean, you had hyperspace in the original, but ignore that. I just like the fact that like you've got this little ship and you can just rotate and thrust to steer around. I think that's quite cool. So that's me and the sort of why I'm doing this. Like a year late to this, my wife reminded me that I did this design over a year ago and I haven't touched it, so when was I ever going to touch it? Maybe you ought to get a proper job. And so I'm like, actually, let's carve out some time and try and do this properly and see what I can get. So the first thing I needed to do is a basic prototype. What I want to do is have a ship that flies around and work out if this mechanic is going to be fun enough to play a game. So now, disclaimer here, I've got zero artistic skills, but I got a sprite, I think that's how you pronounce it, to try and create myself a ship sprite. And I figured this wouldn't be so bad because essentially the Asteroids type ship is a triangle. So I drew a triangle, and then I found out that even if you can draw a triangle, it can still look crap. Don't worry about the graphics for now. These are placeholder things. This is prototyping. We're not worried about what it looks like. We're just worried about if things move right, if things feel right, before we then move on to see if the rest of the game is viable. Also, I needed some sort of level. So for this, again in A-Sprite, I decided to try and build myself a tile map. The idea of a tile map is you have these sort of sprite things which you call tiles, which are set size. Mine is 64 pixels by 64 pixels. And you can then go into the game engine and put these together by painting them in various ways and creating a sort of scene there. Again, basic, very basic placeholder graphics. I just needed some way of drawing a level so I could have walls and a roof and solid bits and like right angles, so if I drew around. Basically, I just wanted to make sure I could fly around something, try and land on things, try and go up through tunnels, that sort of thing. So in Godot, I created the player ship as a scene. Coming over from Unity, a scene you can kind of think as a prefab. So the idea would be that you instantiate a scene from your main level scene perhaps, or your game controller if you like. And this is where I had my first indecision. I've gone through the course and read some of the Godot docs, and it seemed like they want you to use a character body 2D type of node whenever you're doing something you're going to move around with the player and have control of. So I thought, okay, I'll do this. Now the only thing with a character body 2D is it can interact with physics objects, but it doesn't have physics itself. And that meant that if I wanted gravity, I'd have to add that. If I wanted, when I thrust, to speed up gently, inertia to carry it, and then slow down, that's code I'd have to write myself. So I tried to write some basic code to do this. I implemented acceleration using Thrush, I had inertia, I had gravity, and I experimented with these values a bit to get something that I felt looked okay. If you're wondering why the ship is facing to the right, in Godot terms that's forward, and it just made sense for me to, when I do the calculations about which way it's facing, have it sort of forwards in the first place, so I didn't have to start subtracting angles or things from it. Next, I imported my tile map so I could draw a very basic level. Gotta say, I quite liked the way Godot's tile map editor worked. These are obviously my tiles down here, and this is the map I created with it. What I liked about it particularly is the way it let me construct my collisions. Basically, you go to this thing called physics layer 0, and what you can do on each of these tiles is basically paint your collision map. So in this case, my collision's there, and if I had a more complicated shape, I could just put some extra bits in to use it as I saw fit. But that's good like that. Yeah, so what we ended up with is this basic little level where, you know, I've got a couple of platforms and a couple of places I thought I could try and fly into. So the next thing to do was put my ship into the actual scene itself and test to make sure if we got the right things, like sprite collisions. So do they bash into the walls? Can I land on stuff? But you'll notice one of the things we do is we can fly outside and we don't know where we're going. So the thing after that to do was to add a camera. And to do that, we can literally just add the camera 2D node and retest that level. And as you can see here, it follows the ship around quite well. Although one thing it does tend to do is go past where I'd like to see. So obviously here, the player can see the outside of the world that we want to show them in. Obviously, if we're going to have something where we want to go through doors, we want to keep that bit secret. But there's a handy little feature in Godot in the camera node 2D which shows the limits, which is where the camera won't move past. Obviously I had to go in and try and figure out what these were, and it strikes me that I need to think about this in potentially every single screen we'll have. But if I retest this again, then what we can do is, you'll notice the window's not moving any further. If I fly this way, the camera kind of stops. So that bit works really nicely. However, I then noticed that if I took this window and dragged it out, then I could reveal stuff extra. Again, this feels like something that's slightly hard to find. But once we went into the project settings, there is this window setting there. We can change the mode to viewport, keep the aspect, and actually zoom it in slightly. So I thought I'd go with an aspect ratio of 1.5. And now if I play that, it's zoomed in pleasingly, and if I stretch it about, it stays in the right spot. So this felt okay-ish. The problem being that the ship doesn't have a centre of gravity, which meant I could land it on one of the legs and it would stick there and perfectly balance. So I was thinking about whether I should start making more of my physics implementation to say, hey, if you land on one side, it's going to topple over. But then I thought maybe I should just use the rigid body 2D, which is another node that Godot has. The reason I thought about this wasn't the right way to do it is trying to think what is Godot wanting me to do? What is the best practice here? And it seemed like rigid body 2Ds are kind of made to put in the environment and then let the physics code handle it. So I guess if we were making something like Angry Birds and we had a little stack of bricks or something and then we fired a ball at it, these would all be rigid body 2Ds. We'd just give that ball the initial force and give it some properties, and then we'd let the whole engine figure it out to say the physics did this and things fell over and stuff. But I decided I should at least make a test of the rigid body 2D to see if I could make it work. Now I had some issues to begin with. I used the same way of rotating the ship that I'd use on the character body 2D, and that is to simply alter the rotation property of the node based on the character input. Now that seemed to rotate fine, but when I then applied thrust to the body, it changed its rotation and went off where it wanted to, which I kind of interpret that physics doesn't see me rotating it manually as being rotated. It says I haven't had any torque force applied, therefore I haven't been rotated. I don't care what you're showing on screen, I haven't done anything, which is interesting. So then I went ahead and used this method called applied torque to rotate it. The only real problem I found with this is that the realism in the physics was a bit too real. So when you turned, it started slow and speeded up, and then when you took your finger off the rotate button, the inertia would keep it rotating a little bit. And this felt kind of okay to an extent, because maybe you want to put little movements in, so you don't want a great big movement at the start, but it didn't feel tight enough. It felt too sloppy. I found that by increasing the ship's angular damping, it would feel much more tighter and basically respond exactly how I wanted. So it would go to full speed immediately and stop immediately. And then it was just a case of calculating the thrust based on the angle it's facing. So I put this in my little 2D scene, and it feels pretty good. I think it like bounces off stuff. I gave it a physics probably to give it a slight bounce. If I try and land it on one of the legs, it will properly fall over. And the thrust seems about right. I've played around with gravity and some of the physical aspects of the ship quite a lot to make it feel right. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment right now. I've got a little ship, I can fly around. At the moment, I don't really see a downside with the rigid body 2D. Maybe I will see problems as I come into it, but I can easily swap these around if I want to use something else, like the character body 2D. So before I go any further, and this is going to be the content in the next video, I want to make sure that this feels right. To do that, I need to think about the right type of level I need to use. What I'm thinking is, like, if I use some sort of race type course even, that I can blast this ship through to make sure it feels good to handle and basically feels fun. Because right now, it's still a bit weird, because of course with gravity you have to keep thrusting to see things, so going through doors that are sort of out on the right means you're sort of up at a funny angle. So there's things to think about there. I'm thinking things like maybe the ability to hover so you don't have to sort of keep thrusting, or maybe what I want to do at the moment, I'm just on a keyboard using a button for thrust. Maybe I need a game controller which is an analog trigger to give various amounts of thrust, so you can thrust fast or you can just give it a little bit essentially to hover. But that's what I've got to play with and figure out. So trying to build some sort of level, maybe trying to think about the mechanics of like opening doors and going through them into different areas and stuff like that might come up. Until that time, please feel free to stick any questions or comments down below, and please subscribe if you want to keep up to date with what I'm up to and how this game is going.